Of course, we've had these protests, right, in Kiev, and this was following the decision to put those anti-corruption agencies under the direct control of the Kiev regime. Before, they were really pretty much under the control of the West. That, it strikes me that actually since the launch of the SMO and before, there has been, one after another erosion of democracy, obvious erosion of democracy within Ukraine. There's one after another opposition political party has been suppressed. Opposition media outlets, TV stations have been shut down. People have been arrested. The Russian language has been suppressed. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church is being suppressed, and churches shut down, and priests in some case, arrested, or even, I don't know if any have been sent to the front lines, but threatened with conscription. So this is one after another, really outrage against anything that I think when any normal understanding of what democracy is, but you never heard a peep out of the West.
It's also the suspension of elections.
Right. Okay, yeah, good. That's actually right. Right.
It's a big one.
It's a long list, elections. But I didn't even mention that one. Right. No elections. Right. A very good point. But just everybody's fine with that. There's just no criticism. And instead, we're always hearing about how Zelenskyy and his government is somehow their champions of democracy against, the evil hordes from the East. And yet now all of a sudden there was a reaction, when Zelenskyy made the effort, to actually wrest control of these anti-corruption agencies from the West. Then you heard about, oh no, Ukraine is sliding into authoritarianism. And you had a lot of very direct criticisms, both from mainstream media outlets and from Western politicians. And then the EU even went so far as to suspend aid. So what does this tell you? It's just like, okay, all these other things we mentioned, this long list of, outrages against very obviously anti-democratic measures. No response. The aid continues to flow. But what was the one move that caused the aid to stop? And that was trying to wrest control from the West. So, you can just see it. It's very revealing that this is what, this is the concern. It's not actually, even though it's dressed up as a concern for democracy, there clearly is no concern for democracy. But it's like if you try to become independent, pull yourself away from our Western control, that's when the alarm bells go off. And then, you're going to suffer the consequences. So Zelenskyy was forced to actually retract, present a new bill. And then, his party very obediently has now voted to approve it. That these agencies are now back under the control of the West. They're not under the control of the Kiev regime. Now, it's interesting. There is, what's her name? Mariana Bezukaya is a kind of a well-known dissident, a very outspoken individual within the Rada who is often criticizes the government. She's a Ukrainian nationalist. But she's one who's been very honest and, has been kind of a gadfly there. Now, she actually very strongly opposed returning these anti-corruption agencies, to their original so-called independent status. And why is that? It's because just this, she said, we're no longer going to be a sovereign nation. This is actually bowing to the West. So anyway, I found this whole episode just very, very revealing. It's something that we've seen in other places, but I found it particularly striking. It's a new understanding what democracy is. You're democratic if, you submit to the West. You can do anything, again, shut down opposition parties, no more elections, whatever. You're still democratic as long as you obey us. But once you try to be independent, like we've seen in Georgia and other places, that's when the wrath of the West comes down upon you.
Right. I mean, for Ukraine to be sovereign, really, it has to have a neutral status. Like that's what really Russia has been pushing for. Have neutrality. That gives you sovereignty. Really, what we've seen is the countries that join NATO, you give up your sovereignty by doing that. In NATO and the EU, we're seeing it. We just see the European Union, the European countries have essentially no sovereignty. It's really sad, actually, just looking at these European countries. They just can't do anything. It's just like, man, you guys have really been neutered, and they're latched to this crazy beast that's the United States, which is latched to a genocidal state that is Israel, that is controlling everything. It's just taking us all down. We're all going down with it. It's crazy.
Yeah, not controlling everything, but certainly foreign policy in the Middle East. I'll say that.
Okay, sure, but it's just I keep on going back towards this just because it's been on my mind so much. It's just like, oh man, this is just out of control. It is a huge
problem. I agree with you. Yeah, no question about it.
Do you think that Zelensky, though, he's now that he's made this move to introduce the new bill and sort of submit himself back to the Western control, that he's relatively safe, that, there was talk about potentially ousting him, or is he in the clear now?
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure. That's an interesting question. The thing is, like, one thing is, like, if these agencies are... I guess these agencies were beginning to investigate people around him, not him personally, but some of his close associates, including Yermak, I believe. And that was a sign that maybe the West was beginning to lose patience with him, and that, he did this. This was kind of a preemptive attack, and it failed. They didn't allow him to do it. So it'll be interesting. His position, it doesn't seem very secure, as president, but let's say it is threatened. It seems like again, we've had these stories, this increasing criticism from the West. We have this whole episode of the anti-corruption agencies. It suggests that something is afoot here. But he still does have a very tight control of the government, and that's something he's been working on for these last few years. So even with these pressures, it's not going to be easy to dislodge him. And then the question is, if you dislodge him, why exactly? Who's going to do anything different? I don't really even understand. I think there probably are some people or some factions, again, within Western governments that do want to see him go, who favor Zaluzhny, for example. But is Zaluzhny really going to be that different? Maybe on the battlefield he will be. Maybe that's what it's all about. That's the only thing I can think of, is that Zaluzhny he's not a brilliant commander, but he does have, an understanding of what's happening on the battlefronts. He does understand war better than Zelensky does, who doesn't seem to understand it at all. All he understands is PR. And, that's led to a lot of disasters, like the Kursk incursion. That's one of the best examples, but it's not the only one. And this general policy of just hanging on to every place until it's really too late, like Avdiivka, or, now Pokrovsk. It looks like they're going to stay there until it's too late and lose a lot of men in the process. But that's been always his policy. Somebody like Zaluzhny understands that it makes sense in military terms sometimes to retreat, to consolidate, to build up fortifications, in the rear, and not wait until it's too late. So, it means that maybe under Zaluzhny, you could wage this war you're still going to lose it, but you can put off the collapse anyway, maybe by another year or something, if pursue a more sensible strategy. So maybe that's what's behind it, but it's not clear to me. It's not clear that they'll even succeed. I mean, Zaluzhny's out there in London, but maybe they'll just fly him in, and who knows? We'll see.
Isn't it a problem, though, that Zaluzhny is a pretty open neo-Nazi? I mean, this guy has two
it's not a
busts
problem,
of Stefan.
no.
But I mean, like, it's
right?
so obvious, though. Like, if you just Google this guy's
Yeah.
name and Nazi,
Yeah.
you can, it's all there.
It
You can
doesn't.
just see pictures of
Yeah,
him.
well, you can see,
You know,
or you see the two busts of Bandera, in the background in his office in the previous interviews. Like one bust was not enough, two busts of Bandera. He's a true believer, more so than Zelensky or anything. Like he's always been a Banderite, but it doesn't seem to matter. No, he's
yeah,
championed by a lot of people in the West. That's the thing, we're talking about all these things. It's not, it's talking about all these obviously anti-democratic measures that were employed, the crackdowns, and it doesn't bother anybody. I mean, it just doesn't. And now, well, again, look at Syria. Who do we have in charge? I thought we were supposed to be fighting Al Qaeda, and we put Al Qaeda's guy there. I mean, it just, as long as you're opposed to the Russians, you're opposed to the emerging, if they can use you as a tool against, a geopolitical enemy, they'll use you. And so they don't care. He's a Banderite, but he's fighting the Russians, and they think he might do a better job of fighting the Russians than the other guy.
it's the United States is just, we've gone so off the deep end. If you just think about, how we're openly supporting Israel that's engaged in a genocide that's very open and we can all see it. And then at the same time in Syria, Al Qaeda, they're supposed to, took down the towers, attacked America. They're our enemy. Now we put them in charge. Al Qaeda now has a whole country, Al Qaeda slash ISIS. And then, the greatest villain of the 20th century, Hitler, we're all about, the Nazis were the most evil thing in the world. That's what we're all told. And we're just openly supporting Nazis in Ukraine. It's just like the whole thing is just so crazy. It's like, okay, our allies, ethno-supremacist, genocidal Jewish state Israel, Al Qaeda, ISIS, Al Jalani in Syria, neo-Nazi, Banderites in Ukraine. Right. It's like, can we find any more bad guys? Any more? Right. Those are like any more evil that we can support? Like it's crazy. It's so crazy. Everything that we're supposed to be fighting against and it's just been turned upside down.
Right.
We are the bad guys.
Well, again, in both these cases, like when you look at the Banderites, I mean, going way, way back to the late 40s, early 50s, the U.S. government has been supporting them because they saw that was the one, again, the one force, the one group of people that was willing to actually take up arms against the Soviet Union. So they did provide support through them, through the 50s until they were eventually just wiped out by the Soviets. They're totally suppressed. And then, of course, in the case of Al Qaeda, we've had this on again, off again relationship with them, going all the way back to bin Laden. And then during the Yemen war, for example, Al Qaeda was on the ground fighting the Houthis, and we didn't fly the planes to Directory, but it's our planes serviced by our people, and was essentially Al Qaeda's air force in Yemen. So this is something, and these are just a couple of examples. So this is something. We have a history of using these people, for geopolitical objectives, and then. I guess the thing that I wonder is, like, you go so far with it. Like, again, you make this bargain with the devil. You tell yourself, these people are crazy, they're evil, but we can use them, because there's a greater good. But at some place, you work closely with these people for such a long time. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but I start to wonder whether or not there becomes some sort of, you start to go beyond that. You're not just using them. You're starting to be kind of come them. That's what we've
you
seen
fuse with
happen,
them,
for example, in Ukraine. Again, like when 2014 the fighting broke out in the east. Well, this new Ukrainian government that was installed as a result of the coup, they realized that a lot of those people out in the east, their soldiers didn't want to fight because they saw they were fighting their own countrymen. They didn't want to do it, but these crazy Banderites, they wanted to go out and kill them. And so they made this bargain with the devil, and now you have a Banderite country. Now we've worked closely with these people. We're championing Zaluzhny. It's maybe we can kind of maintain this distance, but you sort of wonder because, like, one thing that's happening in Europe, you start to see this rewriting of history. because the Russians are evil. Now we start to kind of play down the Soviet role, which of course was enormous in World War II. They contributed, really much the greater part towards the victory over, over the Germans. But it's played down. They're not invited to memorial or commemorative ceremonies, and then you get a real reworking of history, and then toppling of Soviet statues, and then within Ukraine at least, and I think to some extent within the Baltic states, championing of the local opponents of the Soviet Union. And in World War II, those local opponents of the Soviet Union were, undeniably very closely associated with the Nazis if they were not outright Nazis themselves. And so you say, right now it's just sort of beginning, but you can see this process of just actually of revising the entire history and our stance with, regard to World War II. And I don't know how far it's going to go, but you wonder.
Yeah. I imagine there'll be another massive rewrite once the Western U.S.-led, empire falls. That's going to be an interesting reckoning. I mean, it's happening right now. Are you worried about Trump when he hits his 10-day? Well, we got 7 days left, I think. Maybe next Saturday, I guess, will be.
Yeah.
Do you think something is going to?
Right. I don't know what he can do. I mean, the thing is, like, they're in the middle of negotiations with China. Earlier, he said this 100%, right? But now I think in the case of India, I said, well, because it's not clear exactly what he's trying to impose on India, but it was said because you're buying Russian oil and Russian arms, and you supposedly have a trade surplus with us, and there was something else, I'm punishing you. It's going to be 25% tariffs. Well, according to his original threat, it was going to be 100%, right? And so I don't know, now there's China. He's not talking about China, which is interesting. And because we're in the middle of these trade negotiations with China, and it's really, we're the weaker party. And I'm sure that he's getting that information. It's like, we can't do this, Trump. I don't know how he's going to wiggle out of this. He promised 100%. We used to hear them referred to as bone-crushing sanctions, right? And yeah, it seems like he's trying to play the tough guy, but what's he going to actually do when the time comes? Is he going to perform some kind of Houdini act? He's going to do something symbolic, declare a great victory. A lot of these trade deals, when you look at them, they're really, it's not clear if anything was done other than, okay, the 15% tariff. I think that's something that he can impose and, is imposed through an executive order. So we have a 15% tariff on Japan, on Europe, and so forth. But then all this other stuff about hundreds of billions of dollars investment and hundreds of billions of dollars committed to the purchase of American LNG. None of that is actually, that's just verbiage. Nobody's actually signed on any dotted line. And the people that he's negotiating with can't even really make good on those promises because those are decisions made by private companies. What I've heard is that in real trade treaties take months, if not years, to work out, and they're long. There's lots of fine print, whatever. These are just at most kind of frameworks, and they're not enforceable. So there's a bit that's real. I think the 15%'s real, and that is significant. But the rest of it is just a lot of smoke and mirrors. So I don't know. Is it going to just be a lot of smoke and mirrors a few days from now? That's probably that would be my guess.
I feel like he has to do something, and something that I'm maybe a little bit worried about is that maybe the tariffs and all this stuff is kind of a misdirection, and he might escalate militarily. I mean, we saw what happened with Iran while we're in the middle of negotiations with them. And And it's just, I just don't know with Trump now. He seems to really live in his own world. I think he really does have a God
Hmm.
complex. I think he is being blackmailed and that he's in a desperate position. He is, Trump as a pedo is still trending. People still think that the Epstein stuff's not going away. I'm just think anything's on the table now, including military escalation with Russia. We have talk of, General Donahue talking about how we can take Kaliningrad, like this crazy talk. And so
Right.
I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
expecting something. I think he has to do
Yeah.
something, and maybe it
Well,
won't
you
be
may
the
be right.
tariffs, but it's going to be
One thing
something.
is right. Yeah. Oh, you may be right. You may be right. Again, it's just like, okay, these people can be, you know, we're thinking through, trying to logically, but and looking at what's been done in the past, but they're who knows what kind of crazy schemes are being cooked up, in those back rooms right now. Again, like none of us foresaw how the attack on Iran, would begin. So is there something similar, some kind of, something similar to Operation Spiderweb? Who knows? You're right. There's all kinds of things that could happen. And it may prove to be a misdirection because you look at the trade thing, it just doesn't add up. And nobody believes it. Like I pointed out, the markets just don't believe it. It just doesn't make any sense. So maybe there's something else going on. That's a good point. It could be. And who knows what it is.
Yeah, since we've had these conversations, I've been feeling like we're at the most dangerous point ever. And, since these wars broke out, since these conflicts started, do you feel that way? That we are really, now it's just getting more and more dangerous by the day?
Yeah, we're at a very dangerous point. First of all, with regard to Iran, before there were negotiations, and those were negotiations that could have been successfully concluded. There was really nothing to prevent it from happening. Again, we did it before. We could have done it again. Iran was willing. They were willing to bargain away their 60% enriched uranium and have a second version of the JCPOA, even something more stringent. I think under Pezeshkian it could have happened. But we blew it. As this attack in Iran, and it seems to me very unlikely that they're going to ever go back to the negotiating table. Not for a long, long time. And they have every incentive to race towards a nuclear weapon. So the situation there is actually much scarier, and the possibility of some sort of peaceful solution is just much more distant than it ever was. And then in the case of you know of Ukraine, yeah, there were some reasons to be hopeful. There seemed to be a breath of fresh air and a new approach when Trump took office, and we heard some very exciting statements from him and some of the people around him. There, but yeah, now we're getting this threats. And that seems to be what the negotiations seem to have ended, and we're now. Uh, Trump is just, wielding a big stick and trying to threaten Russia, which is kind of where we were before. And there's, talk of lifting the restrictions on the long range missiles. That's so, yeah, it is scary. And then it looks like we're back on the escalation ladder there. And we know what's at the very top of that escalation ladder. If we keep on going up, the very last rung is nuclear. So, every rung you go up is just another rung closer to it. It is a very frightening situation.
Right. When we talk about these rungs, I feel like there's not that many left before we get to the nuclear, because I think we'll just skip the conventional ground troop type of war because it just won't happen. You can't get the support for it. The people aren't going to
Mm.
sign up for it. I think you will have a revolt at that stage, when it gets to that point, especially if it's doing it on behalf of Israel. I think it's at that point now where no way, it's not going to happen. So I feel like then you just jump straight to nuclear, right? And that's what's scary because there's just a few people that are in control, and the people that are in control are compromised individuals that are scared for their life and their career and everything else, and they'll do whatever they can to maintain on the power, and they have the ability to end the world, unfortunately.
Yeah. and they believe very strongly in this project. I mean, this is what they've devoted their lives to, and like, excuse
I
me.
just I feel
Yeah,
like,
no.
I feel like a deer in the headlights. I'm fascinated. I'm just watching this play out and happen.
Right.
But I just feel like we always talk about this in this conclusion. And it just feels like that's where we're headed. And then probably, I still think that the good chance not. There's off ramps that will present itself maybe at the darkest hour. But maybe there
Right.
won't. Like
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
what's so crazy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Huh.
No, you're right. I don't disagree with you. I mean, it is a very scary situation. I'm not going to, I, so maybe it's just that I'm, I mean, I just hope for the best. Maybe I'm being a fool, but I kind of assume maybe just because it's easier to assume this than to look at the alternative. I assume that at the very end, when we get up to the edge of the abyss, we're going to say, oh no, we're not going to take the plunge and we'll avoid nuclear war. That's my guess. But I think I've said this before, but it's not really, it's not a very firm conviction. We'll just put it that way.